we are here today to discuss some very interesting issues happened here in Slovakia, a very undiscovered country, I would say. Mostly known maybe for the ice hockey in the US states, for NHL, but anywhere, maybe Andy Warhol was a very famous Slovak guy. But what inspires me now here at this stage, that you were able to produce a very outstanding project, which we can say it's an experimental Studio Bratislava series, and it wasn't possible to do such projects in the old times of communism because of bureaucracy and no interest at all maybe for art, let's say it that way. And Mr. Peter Doggwiler from Switzerland is actually the main person with, you will say it yourself, on this project. And the main question also is, have you ever been in the vinyl industry before, or you said you were a collector or something like that?
Yes, I have been a collector for 50 years. I was maybe not directly in the vinyl industry, but I was involved in music. I ran a music festival in Winterthur,
okay.
Which had all different kind of music, from folk music to AC/DC. We did all the range, and experimental theater, etc. So I always had a strong link to music. I grew up in a house where Sunday morning there was free jazz, etc. So that's what I got acquainted, and that's my background.
Oh, very nice, yeah. So could you tell us something more about this experimental studio? Like what I see here, it's well, it's in Slovak. Ina hudba, different music.
Different music,
yeah.
yes.
And we have, or you want to say it separately, or I just introduced the whole series. You did this actually 2 years ago, which I congratulate very much. I'm very proud of that also. I'm a Slovak. Nova Generacja, new generation. And the third part is naši hostia, our guests. So.
Yes, I had the great and unique opportunity to meet a very important person to experimental music in Slovakia. This is Juraj Duriš, and thanks to him, he made possible to go to the archives, to make a selection, and to bring to your ears what has been hidden gems.
Okay.
The world didn't know about this, and now they can hear, they can listen to it. And it's fascinating how advanced, in one hand, Bratislava was, especially in the first phase, towards Prague.
All right.
That was actually the center of experimental music in Czechoslovakia, was Bratislava.
Very nice, yeah, very nice. Also, this was produced in that specific architecture, I'd say, which is the turnaround pyramid, yeah, which I think Cairo doesn't even know about it, that we have such an architecture here and still people can walk inside. In Cairo you can't walk anymore inside, I'd say. And could you tell us more about that type of production inside this building, or how that worked out, or where did you actually produce that, or that's the archive, yeah? Yes,
in this building, in this unique architecture building, is the experimental studio, based, and still nowadays. In those days it was analog.
All right. So about your collection yourself, what is your most significant collection? And actually you said before when we were talking, it's a kind of addiction to collect, and actually in Slovakia helped you out because of the beautiful nature here in the Carpathian Mountains. Actually you came into the position that you were able to let go and to start also selling your collection. So could you tell us something about that?
I was, like everybody else, I was hooked on the music you hear first when you're a child.
Okay.
In my case, it was the Beatles, the Stones, and free jazz, thanks or due to my father. And then I had the opportunity to travel for 20 years professionally to all different countries in the world. And those were the days where record stores still existed.
All right.
Yeah. And my hosts, they always brought me to the record stores, where they brought other guests to the bar. So I went to the record store.
So you were,
and that's what you can see here as a result.
Okay.
I concentrated in the collection on ethnical music or on local music, on the local Charlie Parker or on the local John Coltrane or the local Jimi Hendrix. And then later, when 1990, we came towards the end of 1,000 years. I thought, what happened in the last 100 years? What was the development of music in the last 100 years? I started to read books, and then I started to collect electronic experimental musique concrète music. And that was then later on the link to Juraj Duriš.
Would this type of music, experimental Studio Bratislava, for example, would that exist somewhere else in the world, or is there any measurable, who would be the leader, or in what stage would that be?
I cannot talk about leaders, but you see, after the Second World War, it started with this type of studios. They had new equipment, not in the East, but in the West, in America. So you had a very important center in the States, Princeton University. You had the RCA radio stations. It was normally radio stations who had that equipment. In Europe, it was Rome. It was Stockholm. It was also Hungary, Budapest, which had its own interpretation of socialism, always was in this field, was always a step ahead of their brother countries. There was also in Holland, in Japan was also an important studio, and they were connected. Poland maybe was the leader in Eastern Europe, and influenced intellectually, for sure, the other socialist countries or radio studios. Very important is also Romania. Romania, even so they had the hardest dictatorship with Ceausescu, he didn't care what they did. They could do what they wanted. And that was the most interesting music actually came out of Budapest. Bucharest.
Bucharest, yeah. And what position would London play in that field?
London not so much. London not so much because it was the musical center in Europe because of the beat, the rock, and it became an industry. There where they started to make money with music. Sales, they commercialized music. Of course, you always found some avant-gardists anywhere, even in Mongolia. But London, there was no significant center for experimental music.
Okay, so Mr. Peter, you said there is another people out there with experimental studio. Do you actually have something from your collection in here which is global or?
Oh yes, I would like to show you this one. This is Hungarian electronic music. And here, that was the first production of the experimental Studio Bratislava published in Hungary. So that's the bridge. That's the bridge to the outside world for Bratislava. Here I have from Holland, Philips. They did some very attractive productions with a small single attached.
From Philips directly,
Holland, Utrecht, Sweden with John Cage and other international. They had actually also a festival, Stockholm's Music Festival of electronic music, one of the first in Europe. And then we have, as mentioned before, Italy, France. There is now in the Centre Pompidou. That's mostly on CDs.
So this music, would that be similar, or is it differences in it, or is there any cultural issues integrated into it? Like, let's say here, would there be a Slovak folk music maybe indirectly out of a sound or something?
Yes, in the first issue of our series, there you can hear a particular sound.
All right.
Why is that?
Yeah.
Because that electronic equipment was not available on any market. That was homemade.
All right.
And that gave a special sound. And listeners, people who bought it, and then they got the second one, Nova Generatia, they came and said, hey, this sounds different. It sounded already international, because in the meantime, they bought equipment from Switzerland and from the West. They had the money and they had the connections.
Okay.
And suddenly it sounded international. And the buyers didn't much appreciate it anymore. They said,
so
the
it
first
wasn't-
one is better. That
All
has
right.
its
That's
a new character.
Yeah.
That's a Slovak character.
Okay, okay. So would this here be actually, if you compare it to fashion or to food industry, the high end of the let's say of the experience, emotional experience? If you go for a nice restaurant or fusion restaurant, would that be kind of a experience to people when they're listening to it, or?
I hope it's it is a peak, but I don't believe in the word end. I don't hope it's the end, because it's art, and art should be developing.
Okay.
And find the next step. It was a very important step in the right direction of the musical development in Slovakia.
All right. So where do you think the future will be in that music? What's the new challenge? What's the new direction, or would that be a fusion with other musics? Or
there is always fusion, you know. Composers and artists, they always steal from each other, and then they create something new. It's always a Mischung. It's a Mezcla. This will continue, of course. Bartók stole music from folk musicians, etc. Mozart as well. So that's a process of evolution that's built in art, especially in music. And where is the next step? Now we have digital music. We have music without any format. Keine Tonträger, to say.
I understand. Yeah.
The music develops when you have new instruments. So it really also depends on the instrument. Nowadays they make music with computers. Before it was with synthesizers. Before it was with electric guitars. Then it was with the saxophone. Then it was with the acoustic guitar or with the flute.
Yeah. So actually, in the end, to say, Experimental Studio Bratislava series is a really Slovak heritage.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Peter, we have got in Slovakia a really outstanding achievement in that movement of experimental studios or experimental development. Would you think Experimental Studio Bratislava, as it is now celebrating the 50 years of development, do you think it has a future, or especially in Slovakia, what would be the type of the next generation of artists, musicians to push that further?
You see, there is a great opportunity next year. Next year, in 2018, is the 50th anniversary of the Smolenice seminars.
Okay.
In 1968, there was the last seminars, a series of 3 as well, where people like Stockhausen, Ligeti, etc., world-known, even in those days, world-known leaders of that music, and not only of that music, in general of music. They went to, they gave seminars in Smolenice, they came to Slovakia, they taught, they made performances, etc. That was a really historical moment for this country, which has not been recognized yet. And also the government, they didn't only close the ears in those days, also the eyes. And they do the same thing still now in this country. So we have to do something to get more recognition, and this will then generate new curious musicians, composers, etc. to follow, to smell, what is that, what is this thing, how can we help, how can we get ourselves involved, etc. That's why next year Smolenice is a very important event.
So you would say Smolenice would be kind of a mecca. Let's say we could push further if we get the right people on the boat.
Yes.
Maybe with a little bit of government support from the outside and or art, whatever.
Depends how restrictive then this support will be. So far, and that was the amazing thing for the experimental studio, Bratislava, they were rather independent from governments. They were kind of underground movement. That's why they have this exciting taste or sounds. Of course, money is always welcome, but if they don't want to tell you the direction, if they don't want to take influence, it's fine.
All right, Peter. So I wish you a great future with that type of music, with all your team, with the project, with all the people coming on the boat. We actually also want to try to help you with our organization, and I wish you a great day. It was a very big pleasure for me.
Thank you. Likewise.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.